Hello, this is Kim, and we're doing the Urantia book. Kim Reads Urantia. That's what this program is called, in case you didn't know. So we're reading paper 184, Before the Sanhedrin Court, and part 2, Peter in the Courtyard. So this is the part where Peter denies Jesus, I think. 3 times before the cock crows and all this. And okay, let's do it. Okay, as the band of guards and soldiers approached the entrance to the palace of Annas, John Zebedee was marching by the side of the captain of the Roman soldiers. Judas had dropped some distance behind, and Simon Peter followed afar off. After John had entered the palace courtyard with Jesus and the guards, Judas came up to the gate, but seeing Jesus and John, went on over to the home of Caiaphas, where he knew the real trial of the master would later take place. Soon after Judas had left, Simon Peter arrived, and as he stood before the gate, John saw him just as they were about to take Jesus into the palace. The portress who kept the gate knew John, and when he spoke to her, requesting that she let Peter in, she gladly assented. So remember, John is there, Apostle John is there with Jesus because he's been allowed to be a friend or companion of Jesus while Jesus undergoes this trial. So I guess under Roman law, that's a tradition or a practice that that somebody close to the person just be there for their support or their emotional stability or whatever. But Peter isn't supposed to be there, but he's kind of following like back behind anyway. And of course, Judas is there, and Judas is kind of embarrassed and mad and just doesn't, not very good. But okay, so John sees Peter and they let Peter in. Peter, upon entering the courtyard, went over to the charcoal fire and sought to warm himself, for the night was chilly. He felt very much out of place here among the enemies of Jesus, and indeed he was out of place. The master had not instructed him to keep near at hand, as he had admonished John. Peter belonged with the other apostles who had been specifically warned not to endanger their lives during these times of the trial and crucifixion of their master. So Peter's not supposed to be there. John was allowed to be there, but Peter's supposed to be back with the other apostles. But Peter threw away his sword shortly before he came up to the palace gate, so that he entered the courtyard of Annas unarmed. His mind was in a whirl of confusion. He could scarcely realize that Jesus had been arrested. He could not grasp the reality of the situation, that he was here in the courtyard of Annas, warming himself beside the servants of the high priest. He wondered what the other apostles were doing, and in turning over in his mind as to how John came to be admitted to the palace, concluded that it was because he was known to the servants, since he had bidden the gatekeeper admit him. So Peter he's not really aware of this thing that the Romans allowed John to be be with Jesus during this time. Shortly after, the portress let Peter in, and while he was warming himself by the fire, she went over to him and mischievously said, "Are you not also one of this man's disciples?" Now, Peter should not have been surprised at this recognition, for it was John who had requested that the girl let him pass through the palace gates. But he was in such a tense, nervous state that this identification as a disciple threw him off his balance, and with only one thought uppermost in his mind, the thought of escaping with his life, he promptly answered the maid's question by saying, "I'm not a disciple, no, not an apostle, no." Well, there you go. One time he denied Jesus, right? Very soon, another servant came up to Peter and asked, "Did I not see you in the garden when they arrested this fellow? Are you not also one of his followers?" Peter was now thoroughly alarmed. He saw no way of safely escaping from these accusers. So he vehemently denied all connection with Jesus, saying, "I know not this man, neither am I one of his followers." There you go. 2 strikes, right? About this time, the portress of the gate drew Peter to one side and said, "I am sure you are a disciple of this Jesus, not only because one of his followers bade me let you in the courtyard, but my sister here has seen you in the temple with this man. Why do you deny this?" When Peter heard the maid accuse him, he denied knowledge of Jesus with much cursing and swearing again, saying, "I am not this man's follower. I do not even know him. I have never heard of him before." 3 times. Peter left the fireside for a time while he walked about the courtyard. He would have liked to have escaped, but he feared to attract attention to himself. Getting cold, he returned to the fireside, and one of the men standing near him said, "Surely you are one of this man's disciples. This Jesus is a Galilean, and your speech betrays you, for you also speak as a Galilean." And Peter denied all connection with his master 4 times. Peter was so perturbed that he sought to escape contact with his accusers, going away from the fire and remaining by himself on the porch. After more than an hour of this isolation, the gatekeeper and her sister chanced to meet him, and both of them again teasingly charged him with being a follower of Jesus. And again he denied the accusation. Just as he had once more denied all connection with Jesus, the cock crowed, and Peter remembered the words of warning spoken to him by his master earlier that same night. As he stood there, heavy of heart and crushed with the sense of guilt, the palace doors opened, and the guards led Jesus past on the way to Caiaphas. As the master passed Peter, he saw, by the light of the torches, the look of despair on the face of his former self-confident and superficially brave apostle, and he turned and looked upon Peter. Peter never forgot that look as long as he lived. It was such a glance of commingled pity and love as mortal man had never beheld in the face of the master. After Jesus and the guards passed out of the palace gates, Peter followed them, but only for a short distance. He could not go farther. He sat down by the side of the road and wept bitterly, and when he had shed those tears of agony, he turned his steps back toward the camp, hoping to find his brother Andrew. On arriving at the camp, he found only David Zebedee, who sent a messenger to direct him to where his brother had gone to hide in Jerusalem. Peter's entire experience occurred in the courtyard of the Palace of Annas on Mount Olivet. He did not follow Jesus to the palace of the high priest Caiaphas. That Peter was brought to the realization that he had repeatedly denied his master by the crowing of a cock indicates that this all occurred outside of Jerusalem, since it was against the law to keep poultry within the city proper. Until the crowing of the cock brought Peter to his better senses, he had only thought, as he walked up and down the porch to keep warm, how cleverly he had eluded the accusations of the servants, and how he had frustrated their purpose to identify him with Jesus. For the time being, he had only considered that these servants had no moral or legal right thus to question him. And he really congratulated himself over the manner in which he thought he had avoided being identified and possibly subjected to arrest and imprisonment. Not until the cock crowed did it occur to Peter that he had denied his master. Not until Jesus looked upon him did he realize that he had failed to live up to his privileges as an ambassador of the kingdom. Yeah. Having taken the first step along the path of compromise and least resistance, there was nothing apparent to Peter but to go on with the course of conduct decided upon. It requires a great and noble character, having started out wrong, to turn about and go right. All too often, one's own mind tends to justify continuance in the path of error when once it is entered upon. Peter never fully believed that he could be forgiven until he met his master after the resurrection and saw that he was received just as before the experiences of this tragic night of the denials. Right. This is very significant. All too often, one's own mind tends to justify continuance in the path of error when once it is entered upon. So it's harder when we've started sinning in a, you don't like this word sin. It's just this very distasteful word. I just don't even like saying it. Okay. When we start out in the path of error, making these mistakes, it's easier to double down on those mistakes rather than go back and admit that you were wrong. Probably we shouldn't have done that. Probably I shouldn't have done that. But when you're doing that, it's so much easier. Just keep going. Just keep doing what and I've experienced that myself. And we're all vulnerable. We all, we're trying to live up to being disciples, being good citizens, but we make mistakes. We're going to, and having the humility to turn around our mistakes is really the one of the hardest things, and we have to try to do that though. So we have to have the humility to go back and look at our decisions, even if there's a high cost to doing that, and we're vulnerable. So we're vulnerable to making mistakes, even when we think we're doing right. And who's to blame Peter? I mean, he was trying to save his own life. Jesus told them, save your own lives. But, if he would have done what Jesus told him to do, he would have been back with the apostles in the first place. He wouldn't even been there. So he made this mistake of going and following Jesus, thinking he's going to rescue him or something like this. And then he gets in this trap of denying Jesus. So, okay, well, I think it's important that we forgive Peter just as we forgive ourselves for making mistakes, and have the humility to admit when we're wrong, when we've done something wrong. And let's recognize today how hard that is to do for any of us, to turn around and say, oh gosh, it was huge consequences and that's on me. I shouldn't have done that. I gotta go. I gotta do something different from now on. Okay. Thank you. Have a good day. Okay. Bye.